Toby, you cannot release 2 videos in one day talking about how 2 totally different Nintendo IP characters are in fact mischievous time gods. I mean, what's next? A Mario time god? I've discovered while doing this video, there actually was a game called Mario's Time Machine in which Mario would educate humans on human history. Speaking of human history, my history, 7 years ago before I'd even started Birdkeeper Toby, and actually a few years before that, I wasn't doing Pokemon Theories on YouTube, I was doing Zelda Theories on YouTube under the moniker The Wind Waker 94. Those videos are gone and taken down from the internet, thank goodness, but the theories are not lost to time, they are all up here. And with the advent of Breath of the Wild and Zelda becoming more popular than ever, I'm kind of surprised that none of these theories have seen the light of day. I've got about a dozen theories, most of which I came up with about a decade ago, and a lot of them just haven't been covered, or there's like all sorts of new points that have come up since then, and it's time, finally, for me to share them with you. So my new channel mascot, Porygon, be Porygon, with Cuckoo Keeper Toby now, and let's ask the question, is Tingle a time god? Tingle is an odd character for us to start off with in the world of Zelda Theorizing. Whether you love or hate him, he certainly has a peculiar appearance, and he first appeared in 2000's Majora's Mask as an ally to the hero of time. Dressed in green, somewhat like Link, he is a 35-year-old man who travels around Termina by balloon, and when I say he's an ally to the hero of time, that does come at the cost of rupees. If there's 2 things that define Tingle, the biggest one is rupees. He loves his rupees. The other thing that he really loves is fairies. He wants to discover the fairies of the Zelda world. He wants to be one, he wants to find them. He refers to Link, I believe, as a fairy, and that makes sense because he's dressed as a Kokiri, and Kokiris are thought of as forest fairies in the world of Zelda. But dude, if you want to find a fairy, just move like 5 feet to your right. There's a fairy fountain right there. Since then, Tingle has appeared in a handful of games, Minish Cap, Oracle of Ages, Four Swords Adventures, and my personal favorite, The Wind Waker, as well as references of him showing up in Skyward Sword, Spirit Tracks, Phantom Hourglass, and even another character that looks kind of like him appearing in Twilight Princess. Though these are not the same character. And remember I said he likes rupees? Well, he even has a spin-off collection of games that started with Tingle's Rosy Rupee Lands, all about him collecting rupees. Oh, and you can get his outfit in Breath of the Wild, whether you count this as canon, who knows. So there's a lot here to cover our bases and start crafting a theory from, but you might immediately think, what theory? This is so unnecessary. There are repetitive characters in the Zelda universe all the time. Just take a look at the shopkeep Beedle, who appears in multiple games, or Malon, who's always running the Lon Lon Ranch. These characters throughout the Zelda timeline are not the same character, they're the same type of character reincarnated. We see this with the titular Zelda, who is not the same Zelda across the entire timeline, or heck, Link, who has multiple iterations and reincarnations. I don't think that's the case with Tingle though. I don't think that these Tingle are different Tingle. I think they're all the same Tingle. And I think he is one of the many deities and gods of the Zelda pantheon. And my first bit of evidence for this is Tingle isn't just a 35-year-old dude. He's always a 35-year-old dude. Link and Zelda change ages throughout the ages, but Tingle, no. Always 35 with his clock stopped on exactly the same time, no matter the iteration. On top of that, Tingle has the ability to cross timelines. When we first meet Tingle in The Wind Waker, he's locked in a cell for reasons that we don't know, but we can free Tingle, and he gives you an item called the Tingle Tuner if you're playing the original version of the game, or the Tingle Bottle Miiverse thing in the HD remake. When we receive items like this in-game, like the Miiverse bottle thing and the Tingle Tuner that is literally a Game Boy Advance, we don't tend to think about it as a player. We assume that these items are just accesses to new functions and features of the game. We don't think about the fact that that's a real Game Boy Advance in the Zelda world. In Zelda The Wind Waker, the Pictobox is the pinnacle of technology, so what's something like this doing there? Honestly, this ancient relic isn't too dissimilar to the Sheikah Slate, right? And if you're like, that's not canon, I mean, hello, look at the Sheikah Slate, it's an iPad, it's canon. In fact, it even enriches the lore of the game. When you go into the Tower of Gods, you can find the legend of the fairy, a tale written from the perspective of Tingle and only accessible through the Tingle Tuner. It reads as follows. It is said that long ago, a boy garbed in green known as the Hero of Time saved this land. However, on a certain island, there was also a story of a fairy who saved that hero. It is said that the Hero of Time met the fairy in the midst of his travels. The fairy appeared before the hero, who found himself lost in darkness. With a mystic power, it would float in midair, dancing above his head like a burst balloon. After the fairy handed the lost hero a map, it flew off as quickly as it had appeared. Better able to foresee places of danger than the hero, the fairy marked them on a map. The legend goes on to say that the quest of the Hero of Time was saved by this plump figure. Fairies live for thousands of years, but this odd fairy was a bit different. This mystical fairy was born near a lake, and when he met the hero, he was but 35. Beyond that, there is little known about that fairy. The little-known legend of the fairy's 35th birthday. On one island, they celebrate one's 35th birthday with a green coat and red pants. They do this in the hope of becoming like the legendary fairy Tingle. Obviously, this legend is there as a parody and a bit of a poke at the legend of the hero that plays at the beginning of Zelda the Wind Waker, but there are two really insightful things about this if you accept this as canon. And don't worry, I'll have more canonical evidence to tie into this as well if you don't. Number 1, it's located in the Tower of the Gods, a location that has been buried under the ocean. It's part of the original Hyrule that's summoned up by the Hero of Winds. How did Tingle leave that legend there? Is the Tingle of Wind Waker really just one of these people at age 35 who's dressed in green? I don't think so, because he also has Tingle Tower, and I'm guessing that took more than a year to build, and he's green on that. We'll get to that. Number 2, according to the official Zelda Timeline, which I have some problems with, and we'll talk about that in the future, this is telling the story of Majora's Mask, a completely different branch of history. That is from the child's timeline as it's known, but Wind Waker is set in the adult timeline. So is Tingle's story just crossing timelines here? Do timelines converge in the Zelda universe? But no, there's so much more to Tingle and the Tower of the Gods, because on this exact square of ocean, the fishman will say, if you want to learn about the Triforce or Triumph Forks, you should talk to Tingle. And Tingle can read ancient Hyrulean. There are not many people that can do that. The only creatures in the whole of the Zelda world are Jaboon, Valoo, and the King of Red Lions, and I guess Ganondorf. But somehow Tingle is able to decipher those charts. And across the other games, Tingle has ties to ancient magics and ancient powers. In Oracle of Ages, he flies above the Forest of Time. Okay, that one not so much. In Minish Cap, he's known for the fusing of kingstones that cause magical things to happen over Hyrule. In Four Swords Adventures, he's flying around picking up Force Gems, the thing that is able to power up you, the hero. Why would he possibly need them? And in order to access Tingle's powers, you need to spend an awful lot of rupees. And that is where we get to part 2 of this theory. Tingle is a fairy. Tingle is always talking about fairies. He wants to be a fairy. He dresses like a fairy, or what he thinks a fairy looks like, one of the Kokiri of old. And in order to access his services, you need rupees, you need money. But rupees aren't just a currency or a gemstone in the Zelda universe. It's been covered a lot here on YouTube before. Rupees have magical properties. They contain magic within a crystallized form. This is why when you visit the Great Fairy Fountains in many of the games, you need to offer up a generous amount of rupees, but in the end, the reward is always worth it. And fairies come in many shapes and forms across the franchise. In Breath of the Wild, they come in multiple different forms. In Wind Waker, they come in multiple different forms. Right down from the small fairies that you can scoop up in your bottles, to the great fairies across the sea, and to the queen of the great fairies, who looks a lot like Fi from Skyward Sword, which is a different note, but it is to illustrate that deities and gods and fairies in the Zelda universe take many shapes, many forms across time, and sort of take inspiration from each other. In fact, yet another non-canon source to add to this theory, in Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, his uncle is a giant rupee. He's a rupee, he's a magic rock. But I can feel those of you who are super familiar with Zelda screaming in the comments. Okay, his uncle is barely canon, right? if not canon at all. But Tingle has a dad, and he has brothers, human brothers and a human dad. So refute that, Birdkeeper Toby. Fair enough, we'll get to his dad at the end of the video, but let's talk about those brothers in the Wind Waker, for example. You have Ankle, Linkle, no, Ankle and Knuckle are twin brothers who are younger than Tingle, and they look a lot more like him. David Jr. is a little bit different. He has this whole story, according to his figurine, that he washed up on Tingle's Island. And according to and I keep on wanting to say the Pokedex entries, the figurine descriptions of the other brothers, we learn that these brothers don't like working for Tingle. David Jr. just woke up with the outfit on. Knuckle tried to run away at some point until you somehow convince him to return. Here's my belief. I don't think these people are Tingle's biological brothers. What they're doing on Tingle Island, where Tingle's got his own statue to him, his brothers are forced to push that drill around and around and maintain the garden of the island, I think this is kind of like a cult, where they have either willingly or unwillingly, in the case of David Jr., washed up on the shore of Tingle's Island and suddenly found themselves in these outfits transformed to look like Tingle. Hey, I think he's a fairy. I don't necessarily think he's a good fairy. He could well be a dark fairy. Like, these character models in the game are unique. Even the time on their clocks is different to each other. I don't think they're biologically related. I think they're transformed by Tingle to look like more Tingles, with the time on their clock stuck still from the point when they were taken from their human lives and brought onto Tingle's Island. Speaking of which, Tingle's Island, what are they doing? Dr. Wily did a video about this, kind of consolidating the fact that yes, he's definitely a fairy, because he gives you a sea chart that takes you to a number of fairy islands, and his is where one probably would be. There's a north, south, east, and western fairy island. Sure, they're all covered, but there's also the Thorned Fairy Island. Then there's the fairy on Outset Island, like what happened to its island? Or the one that you find in the Big Octo, what happened to its home? I suspect at least one of them has been repelled away from the island that Tingle is drilling into, because that's the only thing that motion might be doing other than just spinning the Tingle head around. Drilling down underground to the Great Fairy Fountain from which Tingle gets his power. But okay, if you're still here and you're still with me, then the big question is, why? Why? Why would he be a time... Like, it feels like we're stretching a lot of points to turn Tingle into some kind of super deity. The thing is, these references, like the Tower of the God, it's not just in one game. As I mentioned earlier, in Spirit Tracks, which is in New Hyrule in the far future, there are references to Tingle. In Phantom Hourglass, there are references to Tingle. Phantom Hourglass is happening in a dream dimension state. How is Tingle's likeness getting there? And in Skyward Sword, at the very beginning of the timeline, we see, watching over Zelda in her room, is a Tingle statue, a Tingle doll. There's no sign of Tingle in the game, but now I have the next part of this theory. In Breath of the Wild, Tingle's clothes were stolen from Hyrule Castle. They are clearly very important relics to the Hyrulean royal family. Why? What's so powerful about them? Well, maybe it's because Tingle stretches all the way back to the very beginning, to Skyward Sword, in which we see a Tingle statue, a doll, sitting in Princess Zelda's room. Of course, she's not Princess Zelda yet, but she is someone who's going to be very important and influential throughout history, and here's a Tingle doll watching over her. Which is funny because now we're having to disregard so many things as not being canon for this not to make sense. If that Tingle doll is canon or not, if it is, that means that this clothing, this Tingle clothing outfit, predates the Link outfit. All the knights in the Skyloft school end up dressing like this, but this green garb must have belonged to Tingle before any of those knights. And where did they get the inspiration for those outfits? I know, some of you're thinking, Toby, there was a hero before the Skyward Sword Link? Surely it's just from that story. We even see that story play out in manga form in the Hyrule Historia. Again, whether you can count this in canon, I don't know. But I'm saying, using the context of the games only, what if this manga Link was not Hylia's chosen hero, the first hero of the Zelda timeline? What if this was the first hero of the Zelda timeline? Some sort of great time god that predates everything. At this point, I'm sure there are many of you who are Zelda fans who I've completely lost. Toby, this is ridiculous. And yes, it is ridiculous and it's a lot of fun. Playing with the things that are canon and aren't canon, And I know, there's plot points that disagree with this. There's actually two main things that debunk this theory that I'm going to try and explain now. The first is Tingle's father. Tingle has a father in Majora's Mask who runs the riverboat landing tour. Despite the fact they look absolutely nothing alike, you could of course assume that this is an adoption situation again. Or we could play with the idea that this version of Tingle, there is two versions of Tingle. There's the original one from the Skyward Sword era, and then there's this new Tingle that's in human form that is born and ages to the age of 35 before becoming a time deity again when time was frozen for him as a result of all of the various time travels and shenanigans that happen in Majora's Mask. Perhaps this messed with Tingle somehow, unlocking his full potential as a god. Much in the same way that Zelda is just the mortal incarnation of Hylia, Tingle in this game is just the mortal version until he's aged to 35, and then from that point onwards, he's the same Tingle throughout all of Zelda history. And in fact, in Majora's Mask, it is the first time they mention a god of time, a goddess of time, fair enough, but I don't know, I see Tingle as a bit of a goddess, and if Tingle's a fairy, then who cares whether it's a god or a goddess or whatever else. I don't think fairies particularly care. But the other counterpoint, the other argument that then you go, oh, hang on, but Toby, that doesn't make sense, is the Zelda Timeline. It disagrees, because it puts Minish Cap before Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, but after Skyward Sword, and that has in it an iteration of Tingle and all of Tingle's brothers that appear later on down the line in Wind Waker. So clearly, this Tingle and his family must be different from the Tingle and his family that appear in the Wind Waker, right? And this was, and if you've watched this far, by the way, hi, you're my secret audience. It's nice to see you. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, and if you've kind of worked out the point of this video and why it's kind of a silly theory, let me know what you think about that, because, and here it is. I started my Zelda channel, Wind Waker 94, at a time before the Zelda Timeline existed. At that point, there were so many connections that you could make and so many stories that were just fun to tell and fun to listen to and to read about on the Zelda Universe forums. It was joyous. Then the Zelda Timeline came along and everything had to adhere to that. And that never made sense to me, because the Hyrule Historia is broken up into three sections. There's the art section, there's the timeline section, and then there's that manga that I mentioned earlier. And in the timeline section, before you actually get onto the page of the timeline, there are some footnotes. And this is, I think, the most important thing about the whole Zelda Timeline. Weaving history. This chronicle merely collects information that is believed to be true at this time. There are many obscured and unanswered secrets that still lie within this tale. As the stories and storytellers of Hyrule change, so too does its history. Hyrule's history is a continuously woven tapestry of events. Changes that seem inconsequential, disregarded without a shrug, could evolve at some point to hatch new legends and perhaps change the tapestry of history itself. That is the most important paragraph in the whole Zelda Timeline, because it's the creators of Zelda who knew that there was a kind of demand for this kind of thing, a community who loved to theorize, put all their thoughts down, but they didn't want to say this is the canon, full stop. And in fact, the Zelda Timeline has been officially changed over the years. This is just Nintendo's interpretation of the Zelda Timeline. Yeah, they created The Legend of Zelda, but they didn't want to take that away from the fans, and I think that's something that the community has kind of lost sight of over the years. It's something I want to play with a lot more on this channel, because I have theories that if you just change the order of a couple of games in a way that makes sense, with Minish Cap going later on in the timeline, which is not a hard stretch at all. And what I love is I think even the people at Nintendo recognize this, because they created Breath of the Wild, a game that seems to merge all of the timeline and delegate anything from before it to the time of legend. Because that's what The Legend of Zelda is. It's a collection of legends and it's all open to interpretation. I want to thank you for watching this video and this theory. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. The next theory that I do will be more concrete and less like questionable canon stuff, but I may disregard the timeline, or maybe I'll spend some time explaining why I have so many problems with the timeline as it is anyway. Maybe I'll tell you my Zelda timeline one day. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. This is my first time doing a Zelda video properly here on the channel, so if that's something you'd be interested in seeing more of, please support this content, share it out with Zelda communities. I would love to know what you're all thinking. Thank you all for watching, and of course, soar high, Hyrule heroes.
Wow! Yay! Hop! Yup! Including...
Thank you to my Patreons who allow me to do channel relaunches like this, and a special shout out to the big patrons this month: Jet Dive, Jed Rubin, Michael Hornchew, and Pokey Bliss. Thank you.